So, I can go as deep as you guys want to. I'm sure there's going to be questions, so happy to answer them. And I got some explanation on how some of these more elaborate things work that people run into. So it's basically, the Sol ASI Air has like two versions. So there's a V1 and now the successor, the V2. And they're basically fully fledged control computers for your scope, right? You put them on your scope, they connect with your mount, with your camera, and you control them wirelessly via your tablet or via your phone. So then it takes care of all that communication with the scope, all the sequencing, etc., and all the kind of special setup things like polar alignment, GOTO, setting up focus, guiding, camera sequencing, filters, all that stuff. And then basically, right, when it's running, you can you don't have to look at it with your iPad. Your iPad is just a window. It's not doing any processing, so you can just turn it off, right, and leave it be. And the thing just takes a couple watts, right? It's really power efficient, works well on the battery, and it will just keep running the scope for however long you made a sequence for. So that's it in short. There's two versions. So V1 was the one that they came out with a couple years ago now, I think, which basically was just a plain Raspberry Pi. People are like, well, I could just buy a Raspberry Pi much cheaper than this ASI Air. But I think, you need to understand that, their features are in the software, right? And they have an active development team working on making the software better. And even today I got a new update notification with like new features and beta versions and stuff, right? So the value is really in the software. So that's V1, basically pure Raspberry. It has like 4 USB 2 ports, right? Ethernet port, but it could do like a bunch of things, right? Most of the things of the Pro can be done with the V1. The V2, the Pro version came out like I think end of last year, much improved, right? So they really kind of spent time on the next phase of it. So what they really improved is like they added full-on 12-volt power management. Better input port, right? Not like a flimsy USB connector that a lot of people have trouble with. It's based on a Raspberry Pi 4, so it has a much faster CPU. Different. It has a DSLR exposure trigger. I think that's especially useful for Nikon camera users. Canon, you can just connect with USB. It has live stacking support, so the CPU is fast enough to actually combine live frames. It has far finer Platesolving, so that's really helping on my SET using during galaxy season to like zoom in like at 1400 or even 2000 focal length. And it supports like newer kind of their gear. It has USB 3 ports, 2 of them, which is just a feature of the Raspberry. But the nice thing is, right, these images are getting ever larger, and I noticed that the previews, that the speed which they download to your iPad are much improved. And alternatively, you can also hook up a gigabit Ethernet port and actually do that, right? I have a 100-feet cable, and I just run the cable from my mount to my switch, and you get like native super fast performance to kind of access the files and all that. Really quick, you see the power, the power ports on the side, right? And these are kind of the normal interface things of the Raspberry Pi, like the blue USB 3 ports and all that. You have the DSLR shutter thing. The power management is a reinforced DC port, a power switch, and a couple of resets and LEDs. The reset thing is especially useful because, say you're in the field and you set up the ASI Air to maybe connect to your home network when at home, You take it in the field, and now it doesn't connect to the network, and you can't even connect your iPad to it, whatever. So if you actually press that reset button, it will just make itself a Wi-Fi access point. So now you can connect your iPad again, and you can kind of recover from that failure state, right? The operating system is stored on the flash card, the TF card. You don't want to drop that, so I just put a tape on it, so it will never fall out in the dark. But that's another thing that's of note. So the insights, right? And I found this image because somebody was brave enough to open it up and rip it apart. So they basically added this custom daughter board on the Raspberry Pi kind of GPIO card, and they manage the power, right? Supposedly, it's a feature that's not live yet. 2 of the ports can be PWM controlled, which is great for dew heating, obviously. And you can also turn ports on and off. And I think in general, right, the power usage, because I had a question from one of the members, I forgot who, online. The power usage is very minimal. So I think in idle mode, it's like 2.8 watts or something. At 12 volts, it goes up to a maximum when you do live stacking, and intermittently, right, it can go up to maybe 10 watts, which is still like at 12 volts it's pretty doable, right? So it just lasts long on the battery, right? So I have a reasonable battery. My mount, everything runs on this stuff easy, right? And laptops and PCs and all that stuff are much more power hungry than this. There's a limit. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, I got a question, or Doug Lively has a question about how you can access it on different kinds of computers here. So I'm unmuting him, or I'm trying to. Take it away.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, thanks. I just was kind of curious because you mentioned the iPad quite a bit. I mean, will it connect to a PC? Can you control your scope through your PC connection to this, or does it have to be exclusively with an iPad?
So it's focused towards tablets, right? It doesn't have to be an iPad. It can be an Fire or an Android tablet or a phone, right? It doesn't really is aimed towards PCs because their whole approach is like, well, we don't want people to need to use laptops in the field or PCs or that kind of stuff, right? So it's really kind of a portable setup. I know people are able to control it from their PC by running an Android emulator, but that's a bit of a clutch and all that. So I don't know if this is going to change. I think it will. I think they'll probably open it up at some point because they've been releasing software separately now, for PC. So. But I'll show how it all works on an iPad, and it's it's pretty easy and to control. So I just have a couple of pictures how it's sitting on my scopes. So I've got 2 Pros right now. I sold one of them to Michael Mantini. So I basically set up the ASI Air kind of on the scope, and I keep all the cables intact. And then when I want to move the ASI Air to another scope, I just unplug the cables and I move the device, but I keep all the cables on the scope, so it's easy to move around. But this is on my portable kind of backpack GOTO travel mount, and it works fine, right? So that's a Pro. It controls the dew heater, controls the mount, controls the guide cam, controls the camera or the filter wheel, controls the cooled camera, everything. This is a Pro on an edge. So I just put it on a dovetail on the side. It controls my moonlight focuser, guide cam, all that stuff. So, it's a small device. And this is it on my Rasa. And the interesting thing is, so on the left was my previous setup with my version 1. Do you guys see my mouse pointer, by the way?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So the V1 I put in a different case and it's on top. Then I have a USB hub here. I've got a Pegasus power box here with like the 12-volt stuff. And going to the ASI Air Pro, I could basically get rid of the hub. I could rid of the power box and just have the ASI Air Pro running in it. I did have to change some things around, but I'll talk about that later.
Okay, Arjan. So Mike Mantini's got a question for you. So there you go, Mike. You're on the air.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah,
I can hear you.
This isn't necessarily a question, but to answer someone's previous question about power draw, some folks know that I actually have a little module that measures power, voltage, current, and stuff. And I found with this little device on my with my mount powering an ASI 071 with the cooler running and everything else, it pulls about 2.25 amps, and that or less. I've never seen it go above that. So if somebody was curious about how that would possibly match with their power system, it doesn't really draw a whole lot of power. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
They supply a little screw-on kind of thing, but sometimes I just use sticky tape, so whatever, right? But this works, it's nice. Cable diagram, going a bit in detail, but this is the USB stuff. 4 ports are easy to eat up, so I basically have one USB 3 connected to my cooled camera. From there on, there's like 2 other USB ports that I connect to my filter wheel and the motor focus, which don't need kind of fast speed, right? One USB 3 goes to my storage, which could either be like a big USB stick, fast USB stick, or what. One goes to the guide scope, and the other one goes to the mount interface, and then you're basically full on. I don't think you can, or I think you can use a hub, but it's a bit awkward, and I didn't have success, but I didn't need it at the end. I've heard some people had success with it, but if you need more than this, then yeah, you're gonna run into some issues maybe. And then the 12-volt thing. So I have my camera, focuser, do strip, and mount running from the 4 ports, and then it also works out perfectly, right? The mount might take a lot more power sometimes, especially when it's slewing heavily. So some people are like, well, maybe you don't connect it to that 12 volt, but directly connect it to the battery. And for instance, my mount, an EQ6R, optimally likes like 14 volts instead of 12 volts. So I actually have a step-up converter that I put on my mount, and it also kind of compensates for the battery that loses power over time. So the step-up converter kind of keeps the voltage at a fixed level, even when the battery is starting to go down, up to a limit, obviously. I saw a question. Is that correct, or I can wait?
Yeah, it looks like Mike Mantini was commenting that you can use a USB 2.0 hub. And you want to fill us in there, Mike? You're on.
Yes, I'm using it. I've used it in the last 3 outings and haven't had any problem with disconnects because you run out of ports. I'm dedicating the 3.0 ports for the memory stick, which is 3.0, and the camera, which is USB 3. So I just ran out of ports because I have the focuser and the filter wheel and the other stuff. So it works. And it's unpowered. So I'm not powered. It can be powered, but so it works. Maybe for some people it doesn't, but I found a hub that they say is matched better with a Raspberry Pi, and so it seems to work just fine.
Cool. Thanks for that.
Yep.
So yeah, by the way, I have added pictures in the presentation. So all the pictures I'm showing, all my astro pictures, are all made with the ASI Air. So just as a reference. So quickly on the interface, right? So this is basically what it looks like, right? The software. So this is your iPad, right? So the button on the right is basically like a camera button, right? Like it works in a photo app, right? And that's the design. It only works in a single orientation, but this is the interface, and I'll talk you through it. So in the middle, you have the preview window. You just see your images. At the top, you have your navigation, so you can switch between Wi-Fi setup, cameras, scope, filter wheel, all those kind of things. On the left, you've got like panels, and those are overlays that pop on the screen. So for instance, the GOTO interface here is an overlay. You can turn it on and off. The histogram is also an overlay. You can turn it on and off. So if you want to have like a full screen preview, right, you turn off all the other things and you don't have to see it. Histogram is at the bottom, really useful. Also some camera info. GOTO panel, right? I'll talk about that more, how that works. This is your exposure settings and doing manual shots. And then you can select different modes here, which are like preview, polar alignment, sequencing, and live stacking of things. So that's kind of the general flow of the interface, right? And it's all like thumb controllable, right? To show what it looks like in comparison on a iPad versus a phone, right? It does work on a phone. So if you don't have your iPad or it's out of power, you can run it on your phone, but it becomes pretty small, right? So I don't normally use it on my phone, but it's totally possible. So on any phone, right? Android phones as well, right? Doesn't have to be Apple. So I'll talk to you about my imaging routine. Like I say, I go outside, what do I have to do to kind of get this going? So first, set up my mount roughly around, align it to the north, right? You kind of know at some point where to go. You use a compass or something, right? Then you turn on the ASI Air, connect your iPad, make it connect to your mounted cameras. It normally remembers it. And you start the cooling of the camera and that kind of stuff. Then you do the polar alignment using the ASIAir software. I have a video after this. Then you point it, you slew the telescope at a random location in the sky. So basically, just you have to go away from the polar. So you kind of go like orthogonal to polar direction or something. You click Platesolve, and it does a blind Platesolve, and it will know exactly where it's pointing, and then it syncs it to the mount, right? Then you go to a target. It will slew to the target. It will automatically Platesolve, and it will automatically adjust to precisely land on the target, and then it will sync it to the mount again, right? So at this point, your mount is completely oriented with the sky, right? It's completely aligned. Maybe not as good as a software bisque, like amazing planetarium thing or whatever, but it's basically good enough for most things. You make a preview. You set up your guide camera and controls. You start guiding, and now you're ready to image. So this whole thing takes about 10 minutes, maybe. I've done it faster. So polar alignment. So the interesting thing was, especially for beginners, and I just began with this like a year ago. This is one of the most hard things to get down and optimize. I've used polar scopes and planetarium software and little apps and the PolMaster, and now I'm basically exclusively using this setup. So it's basically, right, you don't need a PolMaster, you don't need basically you don't even need a guide scope. This uses your main scope and your main camera to align on with the Earth axis. you also don't have to do anything with your mount anymore. So I have got a EQ6R and I've got a Celestron AVX, and they always ask you and nag you about the alignment and a 2-star alignment and all that, and I don't use it, right? I'm just like, yeah, whatever, reset, you know, use last alignment or whatever. You know, you want to start in like the home position, so at least it doesn't has some kind of artificial limit. But everything is basically updated by the ASI Air, and all the alignments done through that software. So when you start it, it actually slews the scope 60 degrees to the side to kind of, you know, have a better kind of model of like how it's pointing, and then you start adjusting the alt azimuth knobs at the scope, right? And I'll show you a video to that. So yeah, this is basically your target view. So, you know, this image is where, or this crosshair is basically where you want to point, like in the center, and this is where you're currently pointed exactly. And, you know, by constantly adjusting the alt azimuth bolts, you can get it closer. It will shoot another picture of like the area around the Polaris, right? It will plate solve it, and it will exactly tell you where you're pointed, right? And you adjust it again, it makes another picture, plate solves it, etc. So let me show the video. So this is the start, right? It's just in home position. It detects the stars. It detects your focal length, right? It detects your right ascension and declination. Now it starts to rotate by 60 degrees. So you know, have a little animation. This was with my AVX on a Celestron Edge 8, right? It shot a picture, right? I'm not doing anything. It detected for 92 stars. It's plate solving. It's done. 4 seconds. And now I'm starting the polar alignment. So it's showing me that I'm 13, what is that, minutes off and 39 minutes off, right? So you have to F around with the alt azimuth bolts, right? It's like, you know, you can either manually refresh by pressing the button, or keep it like automatically refreshing. And now, you know, I honed in one of the axes, and now I have to adjust the level of the mount basically. So I'm like 8 minutes away. Let's see. I went a different direction, so I went back. So I need to kind of go the other direction, right? So it's a bit trial and error. Yeah, 6. So plate solving is normally fast. Sometimes it's not, you know, especially for instance when, you know, you just touch the scope, right? And it's all like still wobbly maybe, and you press like refresh, and maybe everything's blurred out, right? So it can't plate solve because the stars are too blurry. So now I'm basically within 1 minute, and you get like an animation like, yeah, you know, yippee, you you did it, and that's basically, you know, good enough, right? Under a minute is great, and you're good. You know, some people try to get it to 0. I think it just gets, you know, the bolts and the threads on the alt azimuth mount are not precise enough to really do it. So you're just oscillating a lot to try to get smaller and smaller. So I normally don't go when it's less than a minute. I'm like, you know, this is good. And then basically, right, so I just polar aligned. I slew the scope somewhere. You know, I shoot a quick 3-second picture. I think this actually one is failing. It's funny because what happened is the mount was still moving, so my stars are blurred out. So let's try that again. Okay, so now I have a reasonable picture. I press the Platesolve button and boom, it has it. So, and now I can basically enter a object in the menu or in planetarium software, and it slews to that object, right? And then I think it's doing it now. Let me see how that's going. Yeah, it slews there. You know, when you do GOTO, it automatically at the end of the GOTO, it automatically make another picture and it will automatically Platesolve it. And when it's not precisely on the target, it will readjust your mount and kind of iterate until it hits the object in the center. So it's all automated, right? And yeah, that's basically how it works. And now I'm completely aligned. I can do GOTO to anything that's above the horizon.
Arjan?
Yep.
Yeah, so Andy Grant has a question, so I'm going to unmute him, and well, actually I already did. So go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, quick question. Does the ASI Air have the Platesolve catalogs on the chip, or do you have to be connected to the internet to do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's all on the chip, so you don't have to have an internet connection at all. You know, I normally run it as a access point itself, so it's not connected to my network or not connected to anything. So I just connect my iPad to the ASI Air network. So it's completely disconnected from internet, and it all works, right? Okay. So yeah, cool. Yeah, yeah, cool. Yeah, so it has a built-in catalog. The MIC and NGC objects are in there. It has like a 2 nights best type thing. And you can see, for instance, you know, M31, right? You can see, you know, how high it gets, right? What the optimum time is to do it. When you click it and you go to it, it will just go there, right? It's, you know, it's as easy as that. You know, and again, right? It does an automatic Platesolve at the end to see if it's if it's aligned. Really quickly. So this is basically the catalog of cool objects. I'm looking for like an object like by hand. So it's like M63 or something, right? I got the sunflower galaxy here. Click on it. So now it's starting to slew. It's not too far away. Now it's validating if it's centered. Yeah, it's centered. It detected 28 stars and it's centered. And you know, now it shows me the picture, and you can see this tiny little fuzzy blob. You know, with a 2-second exposure only. You know, but it only needs like a few stars, right? It needs like maybe 20 stars. So it doesn't need a long exposure, right? I think it actually works faster when you don't have like a gazillion stars. Right, so if it's only a few, then it helps the algorithm to find it fast. Another really cool thing is, so on the iPads you have a planetarium software. So this is SkySafari, the Pro version. You know, full-on planetarium software. You know, really good. You can connect, compare to Stellarium or something. So you can connect this with the ASI Air and basically control it from here, and even slew the scope by tilting your iPad, like it uses the motion sensors and all that. You know, it does a GOTO, but you know, to make sure you're actually landed on the target, you need to do a manual Platesolve in ASI Air, and that will sync back into SkySafari to see if you're actually there, right? So it's integrated, but there's like an extra step. Another really cool thing is, so it has a Sky Live integration, and Sky Live is basically a website. You can make a free account, and you can make your observing schedule on the web browser, like on your PC. And then SkySafari links to that and can show you the target, so you can just go there. So for instance, with Comet Atlas, right, it wasn't in the ASI Air software and it wasn't in SkySafari, but I was able to just find it in the Sky Live, right, put it in SkySafari, and I could go there easy without having to type in coordinates. Right, go into auto guiding. So it has a full-on guiding control. So at the top here, you can see your normal guide view. So you can see the different stars that the guide camera is detecting. It's selected a star here in the background. You see this crosshair, and you can see a little view here of that star, right? You can see it's not super exposed. It's like 114 the peak. You know, you don't want to have overexposed, so that curve needs to be like peaky. And you can see the full width. You know, have, what's the acronym again? You know, you guys know. You see the guide graph, you know, over time, and you can select certain settings like aggressiveness, and you know, if you only want to correct in DEC mode or RA mode or that kind of stuff, you can see the total error and all those kind of things. So when you're then out of guide view and you're in your main view, like, you know, you're doing previews, you know, the guide view is just a panel, and you know, it's showing up here, and you can basically drag it, right? You can drag it with your finger, and you can drag it like down here on your histogram where you don't need it, or things like that. And now it's just like constantly guiding and all that. So yeah, it works. Yeah, here's one of my my views, right? I was capturing whirlpool. You see my guide stats. I got 0.61 degrees minutes, right? The guiding, I can see the histogram, right? You can tune the histogram a bit. You can drag the points of the histogram to kind of see more detail, and you know, it just this is how you normally operate. And I've got a little quick video of like setting up the guider in its totality. Let's see. So you go to that screen, right? It starts looping the guide camera. You might want to adjust kind of the gain and those kind of things. So this is on my edge with an OAG. So it only found a single star. I was lucky. There was a single star at least. You know, and it starts to calibrate the scope, right? The star is actually pretty blurry because the OAG is kind of at the side of the image frame, and it's a bit rough. But you know, it's kind of a version of PhD too, right? An open source kind of version that they took. You know, it's taking the center of this star image. So actually, defocused stars actually still work well. And I've heard that it even works better if it's a bit defocused, because there's a larger pixel area and it can determine the center of the pixel area a bit better than if the star would just be a single pixel, right? So I'm not too happy. I want to figure out how to get the star a bit more sharp in this specific camera situation. But on my Rasa and my Red Cat, this works fine. So now after the calibration, it starts to guide, and you know, it tries to kind of center the star again. You know, so the beginning is a bit rough looking, and now it just starts guiding, and it starts to adjust the scope to stay around 0 if all is well. Yeah. Camera control. So this is one of the settings, right? You can enter your focal length, gain settings, cooling, right? You want to start cooling it, and you know, do file name settings, and you can also set up dithering. And I generally use dithering like every couple of exposures, so it kind of moves the view around a couple pixels, and you know, afterwards in like the full stacking, it can get rid of certain types of noise, like walking noise and that kind of stuff. You know, it's nice. Why not do it? It's easy. It's all integrated. Sequence management. So this is basically if you want to shoot like multiple filters or multiple exposures together, right? You can add these things really simply. You know, you can select exposure time, binning, how many frames you want to capture. You can select also your filter wheel if you have a filter wheel connected, and what type you want to do. So for instance, recently I did a LRGB-H capture of the sunflower, and I could just edit it all here, and even after that I made the same kind of sequence for capturing the flats per filter and even flat darks per filter. You know, in the end I shouldn't have done it per filter, but you know, you can also automate it, and it just runs through the sequence and saves it all to the card, and that's easy. And then we have live stacking. So this is a really new feature. I've tried it. I had trouble getting it to work, so I need to play with it more. But it looks pretty well featured. People are getting good success with it. So basically what happens is it starts combining these things in software together, right? To kind of get rid of noise and get a signal to noise ratio up. You know, you can actually shoot flat darks, bias frames, all that. So it kind of compensates for those. So it actually makes the live stacking a bit better. And you know, it will just like over time kind of give you a better image constantly. So you know, if you take like 1 minute exposures, like every minute you get a better image. So you keep it on it for like 30 minutes, and you have like a fully 30-minute stacked image at the end. So that's really cool. It also stores the individual frames and the stacked frame on the card. So if you ever want to stack it yourself, you know, you can do it later. So it's not like it's either this or nothing, right? So that works well. So quick summary. You know, a lot of things, a lot of items. You know, I think the main thing is you know, you don't need a PC, you don't need a laptop. You know, it's pretty cost effective, right? Because you don't need controllers for your focus camera or for your focus motor. You don't need a 12-volt distribution. You don't need a pole master. You know, all that stuff. So you know, in the end, it's actually it's pretty cool. You can just buy a cheap tablet. You know, it's really easy. You know, I think when I started more than a year ago, right? People point you to PhD. They point you to Platesolving software. You have to download Platesolving databases. You're working with APT and that kind of stuff. And I had a hard time trying to get it all to work out and all that. And since I've started doing this, you know, I said before in the group, you know, I almost dread taking out scopes without ASI Air because it's so clunky compared to this approach that this really made it fun for me. And yeah, you know, it works well, and you can get pretty decent results, right? Negative sides, right? We don't want to talk about that. You know, it's an Apple version, right? It's an ecosystem that you have to be in, right? You can't tune it, you can't script it, right? It's closed source, right? You know, you don't have all the features of PhD2, right? If you want to change like certain advanced guiding things that, you know, you're used to doing, yeah, maybe you can't do that, right? So that's problematic. You know. And you know, I think finally, right, it only currently works with ZWO gear and select DSLRs. So a select range of Canon and Nikon cameras, but not other ones. And you know, if you have a QHI camera or those kind of things, it doesn't work with that. So you know, you're kind of stuck in that ecosystem like it's Apple, right? You have your iPhone with your photos, your iPad, and your Mac, right? It's kind of in a way similar, but you know, I think important to realize is that the ZWO gear all works with ASCOM, can all be controlled with PC. So if you grow out of ASI Air, you can just use Nina or those other things and just control it with ASCOM. And you know, generally the gear is good, right? And it works well. stuff that's still in development. Autofocus is like the #1 thing, right? It does focus control. You can control your ZWO focuser, but it doesn't do autofocus. Supposedly in the next month or so, it should come. So I'm looking forward to that. You know, I'd like to do better framing control, right? So that's a bit of a problem. PWM dual heating. So I basically have my dual heaters run full bore right now, which is fine. You know, but will be nice to save some power. I actually did buy a LED PWM controller on Amazon, so I actually use that to control the dual heater. So you know, there's ways to do it. You know, and just recently, like polar alignment is recent, meridian flips support. You can preview your images. There's external storage support, Wi-Fi. So a lot of these things are constantly being released. So I think that's really cool. And you know, I'll just show some pictures. So narrowband, right, with my Rasa, made with this setup. The Comet Atlas and an Asteroid captured with this. Rosette, Rasa. You know, the Rasa doesn't do filter wheels, so you have to manually change filters, but you know, that's cool anyway. Andromeda with an OSC on the Rasa, I think. Pleiades. Whirlpool with my Galaxy Hunter type camera. You know, my first Galaxy. You know, M101, recent. Still need to work on my processing there. My latest Galaxy M63, getting a bit better. So yeah, that's it. And let me turn on the light because it's getting dark.
Okay, very good. All right, so yeah, once again, if you have any questions, I guess you can type them in here over at the chat window. You can find access that on your toolbar at the very bottom of your screen there in Zoom. Or you can raise your hand using the lower right button there on the participants window. So, Arjan, I don't have any questions, but if anybody else does, I'll give them a few seconds and see if anybody wants to raise their hands right now. So, but I want to thank you. So, yeah, it's very insightful. It's something I've always been curious about to see how just like something as simple as what looks like a it definitely is a Raspberry Pi, just how it's been exploited and pushed to its full potential for something like this. Okay, so first question we have up is from Michael Fulbright. He wants to let us know about something. Go ahead, Mike, you're on the air. Mike Fulbright, are you there? Let's see. Hold on one second. Can you hear me, Mike? Well, he's unmuted here. Can you hear me, Mike? Okay, I'm going to move on to, actually, golly, that's, I'll be going back and forth between the chat window and the participants. I apologize, everybody. That was a question from Mike Mantini. My fault, Mike Mantini. All right, Mantini, you're on the air.
Okay, I just want to add a couple things to what Arjan mentioned. You know, this will not take the place of the normal equipment that we use to image. What is very attractive about it is the portability. You know, being able to take it out somewhere, set it up quickly, and capture some stuff, and then pack it up real quick and bring it home. That's what I like about it. Probably the most impressive thing to me was watching it one night do a meridian flip, and it did it. I didn't touch anything. It was in the middle of the sequence, and I was doing M51, I believe, and it did the flip. It did it plate solved. It first shut down the guider on it by itself. It did the flip. It plate solved, and then once it was sure that it was back in position where it needed to be, it restarted the guider. It waited a period of time for things to settle down, and then it started acquisition again. And I was just sitting there watching. I go, wow, I mean, everything's coming out of this little box. It's just a little bit bigger than a pack of cigarettes. So again, it's not for everyone. The hardcore imagers definitely probably would not like it. But if you want something portable where you can't drag your laptop along, and you don't have the power out in the middle of nowhere to keep the laptop going, it's a good substitute. So anyway.
Yeah, I agree with that, right? I think certain features are really tempting, right? And sometimes the tunability of some of the software is really cool. And yeah, if it doesn't exist in this land, you're like, but then again, right? The results are pretty good, and I think the galaxies were basically the most challenging, because of guiding and processing issues and all that. But going into summer, Milky Way and nebulosity and stuff, I'll be happily running this stuff for all those targets, right? I don't have a reason to run other more complex software for that.
Okay, very good. So got another question from Andy Grant here. Let's see. Andy, you're on the air.
Yeah, hi. I was just curious if it had a polar alignment mode if you cannot see Polaris. Does it have a drift mode or anything like that?
So it doesn't have drift mode, right? It does require a view of some part of the sky around the Solaris or Polaris. I think the Platesolving is reasonably good about missing stars. So if you can't see Polaris itself, right, but you see like stars around it or some quadrant of it, I think it's still okay. Which I've heard. I haven't seen it myself. I haven't tried it myself, but it doesn't do stuff like drift align per se, right? I heard people are able to do things like that by just slewing and just looking at the trail in the guide cam view and all that. But yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Okay, we got another question from, let's see, where's he? Richard here. Go ahead, Richard, you're on the air.
Okay, I've just got a quick question. Do you have any information about the availability of this? I understand with the virus that pretty much all the ZWO equipment has been shut down coming over from China. Any updates on that?
Yeah, so I actually ordered throughout the shutdown and before and after, and it did all arrive. What I'm hearing is that in that area in China, they've only been closed for like a month, right around Christmas, New Year, and there's some supply chain issues, but I think they're shipping out cameras directly from the factory again, and I've ordered direct, and I've got it within like 4 weeks. I've ordered through Agena Astro, and I've got it through them, and I've yeah, there's a bit of wait. I think everybody's really excited about this, so there's a lot of demand, but I think Mike Mantini tried to order it at High Point, and he had to wait like many months. And maybe the larger vendors, get so many people requesting the gear that this waiting list is just too long, and it will take you a long time. But Agena, for instance, I think it's a bit smaller. They were able to every batch they got, I could get one out of. So I would generally just reach out to them in chat and say like, hey, what's the availability like? Do you expect a shipment, and do you still have room? And then they can tell you. But otherwise, just order it direct from ZWO. You can pay with PayPal, right? If there's a problem, you can just get your money back through PayPal. That seems to work pretty well. But there's no guaranteed way that's faster. But it's an option.
Okay, just a quick comment on that. Barney Kazaka said that he had ordered one, said they're shipping again, and he's getting his tomorrow. Okay, so we have another question from Matthew Willis. Let's see, unmute him. All right, go, Matt. You're on the air.
Just more of an observation than a question. I've had both versions of the Air. Liked it all right, but I'm still of the generation more comfortable with a mouse and a keyboard versus a touchscreen. But what I did find I like it on is the first night when I go to image, I'll bring my laptop outside and frame the image and kind of learn how long my exposures are going to be. But the second and third night when I'm just collecting hours, that's when I go to the Air and just set it for whatever exposures I worked out the first night. And the only thing I have to come outside for right now is focusing, which is being solved, I believe is said earlier in the next update. And then that allows me to play on my computer inside and sit in the warmth. And then once every 2 hours, I go outside, focus on the Air, and then I'm back inside.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's more, I treat it like a expendable device when I'm not outside to monitor it.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point. You know, the thing that I did is I put ZWO focusers on all my scopes. They're the eaves, and you can control the eaves with the tablet as well. There's like I didn't show an image of that, but there's basically arrows and a position. You can just type in the position. You can store the position per filter, etc. And so I can just focus it from inside as well. Right, I don't have to be at the scope at that point. So, but yeah, the autofocus is the thing that's obviously the big feature.
Okay. All right. I don't see any more questions. I guess we'll bring it to a close there. So I'd like to thank you. Just imagine everybody clapping like we always do over at Manchester. So, so thank you very much. Actually, nope, just got one that came in. Hold on one second. We got a question from Barton here. Meeks. Hopefully I got his name right. Let's see. I don't know if he has to unmute himself or what.
I'm sorry.
Okay. All right, Barton, you're on the air.
Yes, I was curious about, is there a shutdown button on the application or is there a shutdown button on the device? And what do you do about replacement SD cards if you need to replace it?
Yeah, I think a really good question. So there's a off button in the menu. So I think it's good practice to just turn the software off and then turn the hardware off, right? You know, I've heard people have problems when they just flip the switch on the device itself, right? But you know, I haven't seen a problem, but you just want to be safe. On the SD card, right? So yeah, it's a flimsy little SD card. So what people say is you get the thing, you just make a backup of it, or even what I did is I just got another SD card and I made a copy on it, and I'm just running the copy, and I keep the original in my storage. So it's just running on that copy, and then I put a bit of tape over it so it can never fall out or I can never kind of accidentally touch or break it or whatever. And then most of the storage is just done on the USB stick, right? So there's a fast USB 3 stick, which is also faster to copy out of than the SD card on your PC. So that's what I just use for storage, right? And so yeah, then the SD card is just integrated with the machine and you don't touch it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and I think Mantini says in the chat that it's it contains the license as well. So if you would lose it, then you know, you can request a new license at ZWO, but you know, yeah, that's, you know, you don't want to do that, especially not in the middle of the night. So you know, have to have a backup ready.
Okay, very good. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions, so I guess what I'll do is I'll be right back. Everybody can just like raise their hand and or chat. I'll put it into the chat window if they have an image to show off. I'll be back in, I don't know, 30 seconds. Okay, well, so far I don't see anybody here who wishes to show off any images. Let's see. Okay, we got one from Roland here. So I guess well, you. So Roland, you're on the air. Take it away.
All righty, let's see here. Share. We got it.
Yep, I see it.
All righty, so this was M81 Bode's Galaxy. This is the first light from my ONTC Newtonian, which I acquired secondhand from Chris White in January. And this is the first data that I processed all the way through. So it's about 26 hours total, HA, LRGB, pretty much 4 hours of red, 6 hours of green and blue, 6 hours of L, and 2 hours of HA, more or less. And processed, acquired with Voyager and processed with PixInsight. So I was pretty happy. It's nice to see the kind of detail that you're able to capture out here, a little darker sight. I don't know, zoom in here a little bit, but we got some pretty decent data in the dust lanes, as well as the HA knots, and the outer halo of the galaxy didn't get too bad. I left some of the noise in there. I didn't want to smooth it out too much, but overall I was happy with it as a first light here. So that's it.
So is that your scope, or I mean, well, you said you got it from, I can't remember his name off sudden, but
yeah, Chris White. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, oh, okay. Were you planning on getting one yourself? Because I look at that scope and I don't know, maybe that's a good stopping point, but I've already had an F4 Newtonian in the past.
Yep.
And it actually was my first imaging scope, but I moved on to other things and I sold that. Yeah, I was looking at getting the F5 version of it. So, I mean, what are your thoughts with it? I think that's the same one that, yeah. What are your thoughts of it?
Yeah, so they make an F4, 4.5, and a 5. This one has the Teleview Paracore field flattener on it, which also increases it to an F5.2. So it's a little less fussy with the Paracore installed. So still a fast scope, you know, nice light bucket, and I didn't find it very difficult to set up. I have the auto collimator, the Cat's Eye auto collimator tools, which really made the setup and the collimation pretty much a rote matter of just following the instructions. So that was nice.
Okay, very good. So if you could post that on the Yahoo group, I'm sure, and if you're okay with it as well.
Yep.
I'm sure a lot of people on the club's Facebook website would like to see that. I'd like to show that off for them. But we have a question about the image. It looks like from Andy, or maybe he has an image to present. Let's see. Andy, what you got?
Yeah, I actually have an image.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, thanks, Roland.
Yep.
All right.
See if I can figure out how to get it. Y'all see that?
Yep, I got it.
Okay. I'm a little embarrassed to show this after Roland's picture, but back in February, I took some data on about 4 targets, and this is the first one I've finally gotten around to process. This is M95 and M96 and 105 and a couple other little galaxies down here. I only have about 2 hours of data on this. This is from my house. It's LRGB. I had an hour of L and 30 minutes of R and 30 minutes of G and only 20 minutes of B through my 90 millimeter refractor. Just basically trying out RGP from my house, because usually I only do narrowband. And it's not the greatest picture, but after Michael's presentation on ABE and DBE, I tried some DBE on it, and even though it's not the greatest picture, I'm pretty happy with the way the background turned out compared to the data I started with. But
well, I got a question about that actually.
Okay.
What is it? Do you happen to have the image? You know, sort of like a before and after, you know, DB.
I don't handy, but I'm sure I could dig it out. I have to open up PixInsight and see if I still have it. But I had a whole bunch of like red and green and, you know, just this rainbow in the background, and it turned out pretty well. I mean, there's still a lot of noise and it's not perfect, but it's the first time I've actually tried to remove background like that on my own. So it's a stepping stone in my processing. But that's it.
Okay, anybody else have anything to show? Let's see. Oh, okay, wait a minute. We got Arjan. He's got something to show off here. Let's see. Hold on.
Hello.
Arjan, go for it.
Hey, so yeah, I've been getting into solar. So thanks for all your tips. I didn't think I followed any of your tips because you're all like, yeah, you got to buy a LUNT, and I went for a quark chromosphere anyway. So but it's, I find solar is pretty interesting in terms of oh, let's see, this is not good. Let me see how this works. Okay, yeah, share this. I think there's a lot of creativity involved in solar to kind of process the images and to try to get interesting views out of it. So this was an interesting view of the of a spot, I think, on the surface. You can really see like the patterns and the flux lines kind of move, etc. I think this was really interesting. I'm finding there's a lot of problems with seeing in general, so you need to kind of do a lot of compensation with all kind of funky software to kind of get it in a good space. This was an actual solar spot that I found. I think this is a multi-exposure one where I have like a chromosphere and a photosphere photo that I combine together, right? So the sides is the flares are basically the separate one. This was another process, right? And I think that's where it's like in the artistic realm of like, well, you can play with like, what's black, what's dark, right? It's how do you color things, and I think all of them have like a certain attraction. So I think this was an interesting view as well of like an interesting prominence that was flying off. This is my scope. So it's a f9 100 mil EvoStar scope. I put a quark on the end, right? I put a Z2BO on the end. Oh, I have another picture. Z2BO on the end, a tilt reducer. Put my focus motor on it so I can control it from inside. I have the guider on the top, and I got a huge ERF filter from Mike Mantini that I put on the front, and I 3D printed a adapter on it to kind of put it in the front. And basically, the idea is it's a yellow filter, so it will stop a lot of energy from getting into the scope, so not heating up the scope on the inside, but keep the heat outside of the scope, so I don't have like inner scope turbulence and that kind of stuff. It's I still need to tweak it a bit, but this is my general setup right now. Let's keep with solar. This was a prom I just shot the other day, and I think the interesting thing is you see the prominences, right? They shoot up from the sun and then they start raining down again because of all the gravity. So it actually the correct, because this is bouncing, right? So the correct direction is when you see those little nodules kind of start falling back to the surface of the sun and all that. But I think it's kind of an interesting effect, and I think every day there's something interesting to look for. What I do is it's called GONG, Solar Network or something. It's a worldwide network of big ass scopes like Big Bear and everywhere around the world. And you can look at the HA images that these scopes are capturing. So you can actually see before you carry your scope out if there's anything interesting to see. Right, and oh yeah, there's a big problem there. Okay, let's zoom in on that one. So I can share the link. It's useful, and you can even download animations from it. So you get like full disc, like high res animations from like professional observatories that are 24/7 observing the sun. So that's cool. this was one of my first outings, and I got lucky with a amazing a flare that shot up. After I sharpened it, you know, what really became apparent is that here on the left, it's basically like a corkscrew effect that shoots up in the sky, and you can see the plasma swirling around the corkscrew when it's kind of moving off. So if you observe that when it's going, you actually see that the whole thing turning and like shooting up in the sky, and then at some point it just gets back, right? The sun's gravity is so heavy that it just falls back. So I think it just loops back on the sun if you would have captured it completely. But yeah, this is amazing. It's too overexposed. You know, it was my first try for an animation, but I hope to do better. But it's it's hard to find such amazing occurrences. You know, it's interesting things to see, right? This looks like a tree, and I'm like, how's there a tree on the sun? And I even made it green. You know, I'm like, you know, come on, right? Are there, you know, it's just crazy looking the type of things that are visible. This was a image of the surface, and I don't know if you can see it, but this is like over a period of 2 hours, and you can actually see that the sun is rotating. So you can see it like rotate over this period of time, which I thought was really interesting. And this implores me to make more longer captures over a longer amount of time to get more rotation out of the sun, because I thought it was really interesting to see what's happening there. And also, right, you see all the field lines constantly kind of wiggling around and doing all this interesting kind of plasma shooting across these magnetic field lines and all that. There's some super interesting detail there. This is a one I just processed today, trying to do another kind of these multi-exposure things. You know, I trying to align them together, so that's basically what's happening. But I was just trying to play with my my processing techniques, because even if there's nothing kind of super spectacular, you can still practice your processing and all that. And you know, even in black and white, right? These things are stunning, right? And I kind of like this one as well. I'm finding, you know, if you crank up the contrast and do high pass type sharpening, the wavelet sharpening, right? You have to tune those figures really well. You can get like some pretty amazing detail. You know, sometimes it feels like wavelet are a bit cheating, because the source image is so blurry that sometimes, and you're like, wow, how's it even getting any detail out of it? But then if you make an animation out of it, it actually does hold the detail over the animation. So it's not random, right? It actually is the signal, right? And it's showing the signal, just like amplifying a lot of these things in interesting ways. And this is the thing I posted the other day, which is this floating thing that just didn't go anywhere for like 2 hours. I actually noticed this on the edge of one of these gone solar images, because I saw this blurry thing there, and like, what's that? And I didn't see it go away. So a couple hours later, I picked up my telescope, put it outside, and was able actually to capture it. But I had to super heavy expose it to get it, because it was really faint. So yeah, and finally, I want to kind of take the entire meeting. So I've been playing around with M63. It's hard to process these galaxies. So, you know, my first image, I noticed that I see a lot of stars, but also the stars were really kind of bright and kind of getting into disks. But I did see a lot of nebulosity and kind of faint stuff around the site. You know, after doing a mass stretch and kind of more you know, reasonable processing of stars, I noticed that my stars were way smaller, but also way less. So I didn't do any star reduction. I just like basically mass stretch to kind of limit the star So yeah, I found that was interesting to to see, you know, how much impact some of these stretching things can have, because, you know, the stars are so insanely bright compared to the galaxy sometimes that, you know, just stretching the image makes the stars basically a complete round disk the size of the airy disk, and it just becomes this big old circle. So yeah, you know, that was my learnings with that. So, and thanks for the help, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I got a question. Just well, sort of both a comment and a question. Have you ever looked at that forum called Solar Chat? Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, that's what I've used for all my references as far as that goes. But yeah, you said it was it going that? Yeah, I keep forgetting that exists. Yeah, so I have this little app that's on my an Android app that shows kind of like a live view of what the sun looks like in H alpha, and that's usually what I use. But yeah, if you don't mind, yeah, post that link for it, and yeah, because I feel like that would be a little more informative than just the Android app. So okay, I guess doesn't see. Yeah, so there was a comment from Mike Mantini, another good source. Look for solar material is over at the Solar Ham website as well. So actually, I never heard that one either. So yeah, that's something else to look at. But in general, I think Arjan, I like the what was it, the corkscrew one actually better than the floating one. Yeah, I mean, you don't have any surface detail in that one, but yeah, that one's just so much more dramatic for people to appreciate how like large and violent this thing is, you know. So
yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah, but I think, right, so yeah, you know, there's a supernova visible in M61 right now, right? So that's awesome, right? That's dynamic stuff in deep sky. So I'm gonna try to make a picture of that. But the sun is like different every day, right? And it's really dramatic, and sometimes it's a bust, and it's even solar minimum right now. So you don't, you know, sometimes there's nothing, but you know, it's really rewarding. So I would just recommend it. It's a nice addition to nighttime astronomy.
Yeah, very good. So yeah, if anybody else who's heard that from about the M61, I'm not going to be able to get onto it as usual. But yeah, it'd be nice to like see sort of like a before and after of that supernova when it's at its peak, and then, you know, later on, kind of illustrate a little blinking effect between before and after the star dies. So anyway, so doesn't look like I see anybody else here that wants to present. So I don't think, here, let me make sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah, I don't think anybody else has anything to present here. So I guess I want to thank everybody for showing up. And I've been recording this whole meeting. It's the first time I've recorded. So maybe someone else was also recording. And yeah, I guess that's like it, and I'll just like look into that. And it's the first time I've done it, so we'll see how it turns out. Hopefully, it got everything. It looks like everything's fine. So, okay, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and I'm out of here.